guys, it's your girl Melissa. So today's message, right, what I want to talk about is about guilt and shame, right? How many of us have guilt and shame pinned up into our traumas, right? Have you ever experienced PTSD, OCD, anxiety of things of that nature when your brain is erratic and you can no longer identify who you are, right? Because you're so stuck in your mind, right? That everything feels like a dream. And this is with anything. If you're going through bipolar, if you're going through OCD, if you're going through anxiety, if you're going through depression, you have this heavy load on you with guilt on your shoulders and shame. It's as if you're carrying a book bag of 50 pounds with you, right? And you're trying to move ahead, right? In the midst of you moving ahead, you have this heavy backpack that's weighing on you, right? That's how guilt and shame is carried on to you, right? Don't matter where you go, don't matter where you turn, you're always carrying that book bag with you, right? Guilt and shame everywhere you go, right? So the reason for that, right, that guilt and shame may not even be your fault. More than likely, it's not your fault, depending on when things happen, right? When did your trauma happen? When did you start to experience OCD symptoms? When did you start experiencing anxiety symptoms, right? Things of that nature, right? So for me, let's take me for example, because I can only really speak off of my experience, and I have other people that I can speak about, but I'd rather be the source so that way y'all could understand it more clearly, and I'm actually speaking from my own experience, right? So like I know I talk about a lot of trauma, sexual trauma, neglect, those things of that nature, right? So I always walked around with guilt and shame. I always thought it was my fault, my fault, my fault, my fault, right? Because what happened was, right, when my incident happened, right, I was 6 years old. Keep that in mind. So my brain is completely underdeveloped at 6 years old. At 6 years old, I can't process. At 6 years old, I can't do anything because I'm too young. I don't even know what happened. So depending on when your trauma happened, if your trauma happened to you anywhere less than like 18 and under, or even 21 and under, because your brain is so underdeveloped, then you're not really processing. You're not really thinking. It's a different type of state that you're in. And if the younger that you are, let's say you're between 8 and under, you're more in a hypnotic state, so you don't really know everything. You can't really process. See, what my trauma happened when I was 6, so I would disconnect from it, right? Because it was 6, so my brain would take me all the way back to 6 years old. And as an adult, I know exactly what happened, right? As an adult, I can make sense of all that stuff that happened, right? But as a 6 year old, I can't, right? So you can't. What happens with trauma, right? I'm gonna try to break this down so that y'all really understand. If you experience trauma at a young age, right, you're trying to process a trauma that happened to you as a child, as an adult. It's not going to work. The two is going to get smushed. So that's why consciously you know something's happening, right? Consciously you know something happened, right? But that's why your subconscious is always haywire because of your trauma. And it could be different trauma, right? It could be trauma of a lost one, trauma of a car accident, trauma of physical abuse, trauma of neglect, trauma of not, some people also lose their life, not lose their life, but let's say if you was able to walk and you're no longer able to walk and you're amputated, your arms, your legs, like you're no longer able to physically use those things, right? So trauma can come in all forms, right? Trauma can come from a loss of identity. So what I want to talk about is like those guilt and as we discuss guilt and shame and trauma, you need to understand what is happening, right? Because it's so much that's happening at one time. It's hard to fit in one thing into one category, right? Because when you have mental health, more than likely people that experience mental health have more than one diagnosis, right? Because they all are related. Anxiety, PTSD, depression, OCD, bipolar, schizophrenic, all of those components of mental health are all linked up. And they all have similar qualities, right? Basically, a person is consciously aware that something's happening, right? That's, you know what I mean? And it's beyond them, right? So that's a lot of us that go through different things. And there's a lot of spiritual component to it. I haven't introduced a spiritual component to it, but that will come into play, right? So when my trauma happened to me, right, here I am as an adult, 30, when it happened, I was older. So I'm trying to make sense. I'm trying to make sense. I'm trying to make sense of all this stuff that happened to me at 6 years old. And as a adult, like, why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? And I'm going back replaying it. I could have did this, or why didn't I do that? Instead of realizing I was only 6 years old. What do you really expect from a 6 year old? And on top of that, I did exactly what I was supposed to, excuse me, what I was supposed to do. When that happened, I did exactly what I was supposed to do. I froze. I didn't know what to happen, right? And most of us that are into certain trauma, whether you was in a vehicle accident, whether you was physically abused, whether you was sexually abused, whether you were neglected, you did exactly what you were supposed to do at that time with what the information you had. Yeah, you made a through your experience of trauma and different things, you made us seek more information, right, to figure out what is going on. But that was at the aftermath, right? So you can't walk around with guilt and shame for how you responded during that time. You have to start learning how to forgive yourself, especially if you're just a baby yourself. I really held myself up to these high standards at 6 years old. And I was just a baby. I'm like, what the heck was I thinking? Like, as an adult, I know what I'm thinking. As an adult, I know how to process, as long as I'm not in a funky state, right? But as a kid, as a 6 year old, I just put too much responsibility on that little girl. And a lot of us do that. A lot of us put a lot of responsibility on ourselves. We are natural people that take blame. That for we're wired it up. We'll be like, well, why didn't I respond like this? Or why didn't I do that? Or what does that mean? Or what's going to happen next? And now you're living from a state of trauma. So your whole life that you're currently living in, if you're experiencing trauma, you're living in a state of traumatic fear. So you're not really living. I mean, you're living, but you're not really living to your full potential of doing the things you want to do to that next level. Because you're living, but you're living in scare. If you live in fear mode, then you're not truly living, right? You can't live fully if you're constantly scared. You're not going to draw in love. You're not going to draw in other things because you're stuck. Trauma does certain things. They matter makes you run or it keeps you stuck. It doesn't keep you at a peaceful state where you can really draw in peace. And once I start to draw in peace, right? Sometimes it's so quiet. I'm like, something's wrong. But that's the normal homeostasis of your mind. It's supposed to be quiet. It's supposed to be relaxed. It's not supposed to be that. But since I got so used to the chaos, right, it became normal. And if I didn't have the chaos, I would create it. That's how it works because then your body starts to get addicted to the chaos, to that, because it's a certain I forgot exactly what it's called, but there's a certain chemical in our brains that picks up the stress and stuff like that. And if your body starts to produce it at a higher level, and you've been producing this stress hormone level for so many months, years, or whatever the case may be, you're not just going to regulate because now you became addicted to it too. It's a lot that goes into PTSD. It's a lot that goes into OCD. It's a lot that goes into anxiety, to depression. So you're not. This is not a one pill cure. This is why no medication on the market can really fix it. It can kind of tame it down, slow down the brain waves, but it's not going to reverse it. Don't think that you're going to take a pill is going to erase everything and that your life is going to go back to normal. It doesn't work like that. You know what I mean? If it did work like that, mental health would not be on the rise, right? Mental health would not be. But it's a lot of things that they leave out for us. It's a lot of healing, alternative healing that we can do. It's a lot of other stuff that we can definitely cope with if you want to do the work. But it's definitely work. You can't just think you can go a day. It's work, exercise. Like if you're working out, you gotta exercise every day. If you're eating right, you got to eat right every day. Just like your mental health. If you have mental health, you got to work on it every day. It's not a day that you can take. It's not a break. You don't have breaks in mental health, right? So, those are things that you want to get into play. So, what I wanted to talk about, so that way I'm not all over the place in this video. So, we talked about guilt and shame, right? We talk about the age component of when your trauma happens and how your brain can go haywire. And we talk about it not being a one fit for all cure. So make certain that you remember your trauma, you know, the age that you were, because, and give yourself a break. Like, start to work on meditation around forgiveness, because you really need to learn how to forgive yourself. That's what I'm working on now. Forgiving that 6-year-old girl for not knowing and not actually keep going, right? Why didn't I respond differently? I responded as a 6-year-old. And it doesn't mean all this other stuff. And no one can control the story but me. And that's the problem. I allow my fear, my shame of others and what I was told, what I even really know in the facts of everything, to control my mind and control my thinking and control my behavior. Stop. Don't give your control away. Really sit down with yourself and really start thinking about some stuff. If you want me to do another video about something, please let me know. If you ever experienced sexual trauma in any way, whether it was force, whether it was pressure, or whether it was a comment that made you feel uncomfortable, it doesn't matter what it is, anything. I just want to take the time out to say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for you all who experience any type of trauma. Because it really keeps you in a state of fear. And it's not your fault. Those things happen to you, you know. But a lot of people take those responsibility. And it's like, and sometimes I get stuck in it. And it's not even your fault. But y'all think it is. And y'all take blame, and we all take blame, right? Because we don't know. But I'm sorry that you're going through any type of mental health. Because it's not easy. It's a constant battle. And sometimes people are not going to understand. Sometimes people are not going to get you. And then certain people are going to make you feel worse. Some people are going to make you feel that you're broken. But you're not. You're not broken. It's just that you're going through something. And you need help. And people aren't going to understand you. And sometimes you're going to feel lost. That's a part of the healing. Right? I would recommend everyone to get like a journal and start writing. Because that's so important during the healing process. And really start asking yourself serious questions, you know? Definitely stop. Remove the guilt. Remove the shame. Remove the fear. Give yourself a break. And know that you were the victim of certain situations and you couldn't control it. That's all trauma is. You taking responsibility and you keep trying to figure out if you could have did something differently and you could have did it. Sometimes we can't. How we respond is how we respond. We don't know about that. You could be an adult too in a car accident and freeze up. It happens. We're not perfect. And we can't always explain stuff. And we can't always project stuff. So just really take the time out to really, you know, if you're going through mental health, man, just give yourself a hug too. Later, guys.